In some cases, when we they just want to hear the insight, and that's it. They don't want to hear anything else. They're not getting the whole story. They're not going to really understand this at the same level. So I use the data trailer. And so my model of the narrative arc, there's something I call a hook. That's going to get the attention of the audience. And then we skip all of the build up to our aha moment, which is our main insight. And so we share the hook with the aha moment, and then that decision maker at that point can get basically the 2-minute version of the data story. It's not a story. I'm not going to call it a story. It's basically a data trailer, like a movie trailer.
Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eikelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. Today's guest on the MindSpeaking podcast is Brent Dykes. And yes, this is the second time that Brent is coming on the show. And it will be a special episode because it will be an episode a bit shorter with a very clear focus on what are common challenges within data analytics when we present insights to our audience. We're going to dive into some common challenges like how to give bad news with data if people don't like the outcome of what you're presenting, how to deal with executives who say you have only 2 minutes to do your presentation, or how to present with a mixed audience. So again, Brent Dykes is not a newcomer here, but he is the author of Effective Data Storytelling, a book I recommend to everyone. And he has his own company, tells stories with data, and gives workshops around data storytelling. So I'm excited to dive in today's episode, which is focused on the common challenges of presenting data. Enjoy. All right. Welcome, Brent.
Hey, good to be here, Gilbert.
Absolutely. I'm happy to speak again. We've recorded a podcast episode before. We talked about a lot of different topics, of course, about data presentation, data storytelling mainly. We talked about your book, Effective Data Storytelling. I think it's a great book. I recommend it to everyone. And in this short podcast episode, I would love to talk about common challenges that people have in data presentations. And maybe the first one, what do you see as common challenges in data presentations? What have you faced yourself, or what have you heard from other people in your training and the workshops that you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of challenges that people have. I mean, one of the common ones that comes up a lot is or one of the complaints I hear from maybe managers or people that are concerned about what their teams are presenting is just overwhelming their audiences with too much information. I think that's one of the main issues that I see a lot, that there's just a ton, people are packing in multiple charts into one slide. If there's any white space, let's fill that with text. Let's pack it in as good as we can. And then that becomes a problem on the receiving end because just too much information, too much going on. And then it just gets harder for the audience to kind of really understand what your key message is, what your key insights are, and what to it makes it harder for them to make sense of what you're really communicating to them and what they need to pay attention to.
100%. This is also the one I hear the most, I think. And what would you say is one tip or two tips to prevent that from happening, apart from not putting so much content on one slide? But do you have any other thoughts how to prevent that?
I mean, I think one thing I try to focus on with each slide, I talk about slides being data scenes in a data story. And so one simple thing would be to just make sure that every scene or slide is focused on conveying one key point. I think the danger is when you're trying to use one slide to kind of communicate 3 different things or 4 different things, then that's where you get into trouble, right? So I think it's about focusing each slide. What is the purpose of this slide? What is it trying to do? Is it, hopefully you have some kind of narrative structure that you've worked on and developed in the background, but then that becomes the question: what is the purpose of each slide? And in some cases, you might even realize, one of the challenges is when we're doing analysis, when we're doing all this complex modeling and everything, we want to show our work, right? We want to show what we did, that we've been working hard to get to the insights that we are sharing. And sometimes we need to step back and say, what is the purpose of sharing this chart or sharing this slide? Is it strengthening the data story, or is it potentially just being tangential or extraneous? It's not really contributing anything to the story. And sometimes that's hard for us as individuals to do that. And that might be where we need to rely on a coworker or a partner, a friend to kind of come in and say, yeah, I don't think you need to include this information. It's not necessary to your story. It actually detracts, and that's one of the dangers that sometimes, in the attempt to help people understand a concept or something well, we tend to overestimate how much evidence is needed to really understand something, and that can get in the way of, we include too much information. Now we're adding noise and weakening the signal of the insight by packing in noise that just gets in the way. And so I think that's one key thing. If you can just take that simple step of making sure that each slide has a specific purpose and that it's contributing to your story, and then obviously weeding out those that don't.
I love that. I think when we do that, we also have a smaller chance that people in the audience have different understandings of each slide, and that they go
different directions
along with these different directions. Exactly. It's very hard to manage the attention if people are all over the place, right?
Right.
If every slide has just one key message, one purpose, it's way easier to synchronize those brains,
right,
and get them in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And maybe related to that, but how do you deal with a mixed audience where this might happen more frequently, where people see a slide and then process that in a different way, or they have a different perspective? How do you deal with mixed audiences where you present your data, your story to different kind of roles or personalities in the room?
Yeah, I mean, mixed audience is always a challenge because people are going to have different interests. They're going to have maybe different levels of knowledge or understanding of the topic that you're talking about. And so I think going into each kind of scenario where you're presenting your information, you need to decide up front who needs to do something with this information. Maybe if you're familiar with the RACI model, right? So there's, what is it now? Spacing on it. There's
responsibility,
responsible, accountable, consultative, and informative, or something like that. Yeah. So I think that's a good model to kind of think about, like, who actually needs to be accountable for this? Who's going to need to take action on this? Who's going to need to make a decision? There may be other people in the room that, obviously are interested in the topic. They need to learn about it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be marketing that's going to be making the decision. Finance can influence the decision, but they're not the ones making the ultimate decision. The CMO is going to be the one that's going to be making the decision. And so in some cases, you may need to prioritize your focus towards that key decision maker, that stakeholder that's going to be making the decision. In other cases, maybe there isn't one group that needs to make, maybe it's a collective. We need to get everybody on board. And in some cases, I might even say, like, say you're presenting to technical people and business people. If there's an opportunity to break that meeting into two meetings, maybe you cover off the technical details with the technical audience to not lose the business audience in the minutia of detail. And on the other side, the business side, talking to them about the business terms, the ramifications, the key things that they need to do and have control and influence over. So that's another strategy, that you could split the meeting into two audiences if you can't prioritize. And then a third option would be just, again, maybe you can't do separate meetings. Maybe you can't prioritize one audience over another. Then I think the third option would be to kind of indicate to people that you're going to address each of their areas of concern, but it's going to be in this order. so people don't start jumping in. Well, what about the details of this? What about, no, I'm going to get to that. But first we're going to talk about the business side of things. And then in the second half of the presentation, we're going to talk about the detail of how we're going to do that. So I think it's just communicating up front, like everybody's going to, you understand the audience, you understand there's a mixed audience. There's going to be people from different camps who want to hear different things. And you acknowledge that at the outset that, okay, here's what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to cover this, then we're going to get into this. So that's an indicator to the people who are, otherwise they're going to be raising their hand. What about this? What, no. Like, we're going to get there, but you need to hold those questions until we get through this initial setup, so that the business people understand what's going to happen. So those are three ideas that I have for a mixed audience.
Yeah, I like that. I like the last one where you proactively communicate that you will address each group's concerns,
Right.
so that people will stay patient and not interrupt you when they see you're addressing another group.
Right.
So nice, 3 things. So the prioritizing certain stakeholders,
Yep.
decision makers, maybe using the ratio model, split up the meeting, and indicating that you're going to address everything step by step before you start to dive in. One thing that makes many people angry, especially in data analytics, is when people don't use the data to make better decisions, but actually to justify decisions that they have already made.
Right.
And to show that they made the right decision, and to even push you as a data professional to get the data so that they are right. How do you deal with that?
I mean, ultimately, you may not have a say in whether or not you do that. If you want to stay employed, you may not have that ability to kind of push back, and so I like to have integrity as a analyst and as a data professional. So, I might look at the other side, and might try and get a sense for what's really going on here. You could go into that situation and just cherry pick the details that are going to support the case. I just don't feel like that's the best for long-term success when we are just looking at justifying past decisions. So I would kind of say, I know there's situations where that's needed, and that's the request that you get from high up. If that's all I'm doing all the time at the company I'm working for, I would start to be concerned that this is not really a data culture. This is just a culture that's using data selectively when it supports their agendas. And so for me, I don't know how happy I would be working in that kind of environment for a long time. I'd probably want to move to a culture where they're looking at the data first and making decisions based on what the data is telling them, as opposed to coming back around and justifying everything based on, what they've already made. So it's a tricky situation. I mean, it's human nature. You're going to run into those situations where that's going to happen. Again, if it's occasional, ad hoc, and and maybe the intention of the decision maker is not malicious, just trying to support his or her decision and kind of get buy-in or support for it. It's harmless. But I would also be, if I'm working in the right culture, I think they would also, let's try and support your decision, but can I also evaluate this and see what really happened, and if, and maybe, and that would give me comfort too. Like if I go back and check and, I try to find if there's any data that doesn't support the decision and I can't find any, then that's great. Hey, this was a good decision, But again, you have to have a manager who's open to that, who's open-minded, is willing to listen to the data. And there are many managers out there that, no, that's no, we need to support, I need to justify my decision, and that's your goal. That's your mission. And yeah, that's a tricky situation. I don't know if I could endure that, if that was the consistent focus of what I was doing in analytics.
To which extent do we have the ability to influence this data culture to make it happen? Maybe not by ourselves, but maybe being the start of that change within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's working with your manager, working with your boss. If there's interest in kind of fostering that kind of culture, I think that it's a good example that I ran into was I was co-presenting in a breakout session many years ago with it. He was the VP at a e-commerce luxury brand e-commerce site, and I was presenting with him and his direct report who was over analytics, and they shared a story with me that he had always been very data driven, and he encouraged his team and her to, this direct report, to always be data driven. And there was a situation where at this luxury e-commerce site, they're actually introducing a clearance section to their website. Now, his previous experience, he'd worked in a clearance only focused kind of clothing brand. And so he had a lot of experience in this area. And so he was like, oh, okay, this is how we're going to do this. This is what it should look like on the website. And he kind of reverted to his experience, which he had extensive years of experience. And his direct report held him accountable and said, we always test everything we do. That's what you've taught our team to do, that we always test. We never go with just our gut. And he trained his team well, and he respected her and her pushback. And he said, okay, let's do the test. I'm betting my money on option A. And the funny thing is, when they did the tests, his option A was the weakest performing of the options. So again, data won. And I think that's part where he instilled this culture of test and learn and being data driven, and his team held him accountable. And ultimately it prevented him from making a bad decision. So I think there's some, as a team, if we can collectively build that accountability, supporting data-driven decision making, even when our gut tells us that it's, this is the only way to do things. I think, no, we've now got this mentality. We're always going to look to the data. We're going to test ideas. We're going to optimize. And, I think that's how you build a data culture.
Yes, great. Thank you for sharing those steps. And so far we talked about, how to deal with people that will justify their decisions based on the data. Sometimes we also need to give bad news with data. So we know that, the insights that we're about to present, that people in the audience will not like seeing them.
Yeah.
What can we do to still make that message land and be embraced, even though it's negative or bad news?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely instilling a data-driven culture is a key part of it, and that's obviously a process. It takes it's not something in a week you can quickly develop. It's going to take weeks and months and years perhaps to kind of get that culture in place. Obviously, I think that makes it easier when we have bad news to share, because people are looking at the data to not just justify or in some cases, I've seen companies where they don't like sharing bad news. And so they create this bubble. Yeah. Like it's always got to be positive. Nobody's, no accountability, no, and again, there's some cultures where bad results are used as a form, like a stick, like as punishment to, vendettas against other teams, or to push somebody down so they can get ahead. That's obviously bad. But then again, there's also cultures where they do not want to share bad news. They do not want to make anybody feel bad or look bad. And then you create, almost this alternate reality where everything is good, everything is awesome. It's like the Lego movie. Everything is awesome. You can't make any mistakes. And then you basically do not correct actions, decisions over time that get more and more progressively, probably the impact of not making changes at some point in the future gets really, really bad, to the point where, entire teams can be fired because, you've completely messed up on on something or something like that. So I think it's, you obviously got to have an openness, an open culture to receiving bad news. And then as on our side, as the data storytellers or the people presenting bad news, I think we have to show empathy, right? We have to understand that, there's subtle ways that we can position this, that it's not about so-and-so making a bad decision, but, ultimately we're not serving the interests of our company. We're not helping our customers. We're not helping our shareholders or whatever, and maybe not direct the blame at anybody. And that's an interesting thing. I've seen some cultures at organizations where it's about blaming people. And I think that's not what we should be doing with data. It's really about holding people accountable so that we can make better decisions, better actions in the future. And so I think that might be a shift, that may need to come at some companies where it's not about placing blame and creating a scapegoat for some bad decision or some outcome that we didn't like. It's how do we learn from this and move forward? What lessons can we learn from this? How can we improve? How do we avoid making the same mistake in the future? How do we make sure, what processes, what things, and so I think you can turn it from a negative into a positive, or at least maybe not entirely a 100% positive, but at least, hey, there's, we can get better from this. This was a mistake. There's some things that were out of our control. And then, oh, look, there were some things that were in our control that, going forward, we can change and introduce new processes or new steps that help us to avoid, this problem going forward. So it's delicate. I one of the things people ask me is, how long should my data story be? That may be a question, like, how long should my data story be? And one of the criterias that I look at is, what's the nature of the topic? If it's a sensitive topic where we're going back to a team and telling them that their program sucks, or has basically failed in multiple levels, that may be a longer data story, because we need to be sensitive around what we share and really kind of help them understand. We don't want to be just, you suck. Here's the metrics that show that you suck, and then leave it at that. No, I think, we might have to weave in, here's a positive, but also here's a negative, and here's something we can learn from this. So I think in those situations, the situation and how sensitive that the audience may be to the bad news is a factor in how we craft our data story, that we have to be sensitive and empathetic to them. And ultimately, we want them to understand what we're communicating. Because one of the natural reactions of audiences when they're hearing bad news is they will attack the data. They'll say, oh, that data, you can't trust that data, or you don't have all the data you need, or then they start criticizing your analysis and stuff. And then people get on defensive, and they're not gonna listen to what the information can teach them, and that's how we can improve, how we can get better, how we can make better decisions going forward. So those are some initial thoughts. I mean, I'd love to get your take. What do you think? What do you tell your people when they bring up, the bad news? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, there's a thing I've read like a year ago, which was not about data analytics at all, but there was this article which had this headline, intent before content. And it's something that stuck with me. So what it means is that first you show your intent. So it's not exactly all those things you're saying. It's not about blaming people. It's not about making any negative about this, but we're here to just get the data on the table so that we can all learn and benefit, so that we create a better organization, get more sales, or improve customer loyalty, whatever the shared goals are, or the shared goals of the audience. And emphasize that you're on the same team. Emphasize the common ground, right. and also mention, hey, I have some data to share that you might not like. So then they are kind of prepared instead of receiving a punch out of nowhere. So now they can hide a little bit and prepare mentally, so that they get less defensive. So intent before content. So intent saying, hey, it's not my intention to give a big punch,
Yeah.
but it might hurt a little bit. But I'm on your team, so here's the data.
And here's another thought too, like with your punch analogy, I think one of the other things too that many executives do not like are surprises, right? And
Right.
sometimes when we're sharing data stories, we have surprises. So in some cases where you feel like, oh, I've got a negative surprise here, and I know that maybe a particular executive or decision maker may be embarrassed by this being shared with a wider audience. It may be where you need to do a pre-meeting with them, give them a heads up so that coming into that meeting, and maybe it's them kind of thinking, oh, okay, good to know. Have you also looked at this? And this was another thing that we were trying to achieve with this initiative. And maybe there's some positives from that. But anyways, not to spin it in a different way, but I think putting executives in a situation where they're very defensive can ruin the positive outcomes or changes that can occur. And so you'd never want to corner somebody,
Yes.
where they feel like, oh my gosh, you're attacking me. I feel like you're exposing me, making me look bad. I think, the good thing to do in that situation may be to do a pre-meeting with them, to give them a heads up and maybe take their feedback on how this can be positioned in a way that, is positive rather than only negative or centered around, maybe people could view it as making them look really bad when, the path forward can lead to some good as well. So.
Right. And it gives them time to prepare and think, what might be next steps, so
Solutions,
that maybe
yeah,
exactly,
like how do we fix
yeah.
this? What can we, so they can be part of the solution going forward rather than just, them being surprised and then like getting defensive.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Then the last question is also a very frequent one that I get in my trainings, and you probably as well. How do you deal with people who say, "Hey, you have 2 minutes, just give me the insights," or often this is a complaint people get when they talk to executives who look on their watch before the meeting started, even.
Right.
So how do you deal with that? Just give me the data.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main ways that I talk about it in my book and in my training is just something I call the data trailer. So, when you look at a data story, you can go walk them through the magic of a data story is you give them a very comprehensive understanding of everything behind the aha moment and the information they need to kind of make a decision, including recommendations and things like that. And if you only have 2 minutes, it's hard to build out the entire story and really give them a deep understanding of what's going on. And so that's always a concern to me that in some cases when we they just want to hear the insight and that's it. They don't want to hear anything else. They're not getting the whole story. They're not going to really understand this at the same level. So I use the data trailer. And so my model of the narrative arc, there's something I call a hook, which is kind of like something in the data that maybe there's a spike in a particular metric or a decrease in a particular metric, something that would catch the audience's attention. Oh, our sales went up 200%. Our sales went down 200% in this quarter or for this product or whatever. And that's going to get the attention of the audience. And then we skip all of the build up to our aha moment, which is our main insight. And so we share the hook with the aha moment. And so we might say, our sales jumped 200%, and we found that we could actually generate an additional $20 million in sales this next quarter because we found that there was a supplier, a competitor that is having supply chain issues or something like that. And so and then that decision maker at that point can get basically the 2-minute version of the data story. It's not a story. I'm not going to call it a story. It's basically a data trailer, like a movie trailer that's kind of like the worst movie trailer you've ever seen because it's giving away the climax of the movie. but what we're trying to do with that data trailer is trying to pique their interest, get them to say, huh, this is really interesting. Can you tell me more about this supplier? What's going on with them? Or how would we address this? What's the opportunity like? If they start to have questions about it, now I think we have an opportunity to tell them the rest of the story. And, we have their buy-in and they're going to want to hear the rest of the story. So that's in that situation. I think, when I look at the executives, they've been kind of programmed to expect executive summaries. They're obviously context switching throughout the day between different meetings, and oftenly I think with data and how it's been misused in the past, you've had many people presenting data in inefficient ways in which they're overloaded. They're doing data dumps, and executives got tired of being like, where is this going? I don't have a clear direction of where you're taking me. Why am I sitting here? My time, I've got, you're wasting my time. And I think that's because a lot of us on the data side haven't been communicating very well. And so now the fallback position for them is just give me the executive summary, because I don't trust you to use my time effectively. That's basically what they're saying.
Right.
Like or efficiently, you're going to waste my time. And so I think that's where data storytelling comes in, that it's not going to be a waste of your time, but we still have this old culture of the executive summary. So I see the data trailer as a way to kind of get people to get interested in hearing the rest of the data story. And let's say we share a data trailer with somebody and they're like, oh, okay, that's, not interested. Okay, well, that's great too, because I'm not going to waste their time. I'm not going to waste my time. And if that data trailer didn't get them interested in hearing the rest of the story, then clearly, it's not worth their time or my time to spend any more time doing that. So, I think that's kind of my way of addressing it. And, I think there's still a need for a quick summary. But I also want to tell people, that is not a story. Think about the the example I use in my trainings is I talk about Empire Strikes Back, right? So if you were to do the data trailer of the Empire Strikes Back, an executive summary of it, okay, Darth Vader is Luke, or Luke Skywalker is Darth Vader's son. That's the executive summary of that movie, or the main takeaway. And does that build up? Does that have the same impact as watching the entire movie and getting to that dramatic scene? And no, there's no tension, there's no buildup, there's no connection with the characters. It's it's completely devoid of that. So it's efficient. Executive summaries are efficient, but are they always effective? And that's the thing where I think a data story can outperform in that area by really looking at something comprehensively, helping people to kind of understand the topic that we're talking about on a deep level, and also understand the significance and the urgency of taking action. Those are some of the benefits I think we lose when we just go with the executive summary that, again, doesn't have the full context, doesn't have the full depth of understanding that you would get in a data story.
That makes a lot of sense. And because I think a data story helps to make it more understandable and also more persuasive, right? Persuasive that people need to act,
Right.
as you mentioned. They understand the urgency more, that it's not just, that's interesting, but they actually want to do something with it. And that's all what we all data professionals want, right? Not just to do the analysis and then see that people ignore what we are doing, but actually have the stuff implemented. And also like the point about the old culture, right? The executive summary culture, because so many data professionals have presented in the past too much information. So now people don't have enough trust. And I think there's, of course, some ways to build trust with executives or people who might be more impatient before that session, so that they don't assume that you're going to waste their time. So great insights. All right. So that was it for today. It was really fun to have this brief conversation about key challenges in data presentations, what we might face in real life when we do a presentation in person or virtually, and what are some of the challenges. So thanks a lot for sharing your insights, Brent, and hope to see you soon again.
Thanks, Gilbert. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.